This is Lauren Kimball for ANI 150. Now, in this tutorial, we are going to take the low poly axe and we're going to lay out its UV maps. But before we do, I want to make a quick note on the high poly axe that we built in the previous tutorial. So in the previous tutorial, we took the low poly duplicate, we fenced off its edges, and then we smoothed to get the nice definition that we would want for the high poly to match the image that we modeled from. We also went ahead and modeled this cool coil and combined it to the axe handle. It's all ready to go. Now, one thing that I caught at the end of that tutorial was when I was showing you all how you could take, if you keep the smooth face history on, like say the axe head for instance, that you could go in and click this and turn it back to 0 if you wanted to have that low poly data still there. Well, I had accidentally turned the divisions back to 1 instead of 2. The handle has divisions of 2, so I want the head to be divisions of 2 just to maintain that consistency. I mean, it didn't really matter that much, but it bothered me, so I thought I'd go ahead and address that. So now the axe is ready to go. The high poly axe is ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize that. I'm going to click on this group, and I'm going to turn off its visibility. Now I'm going to click on the axe low group, go back to my channel box, and turn on that visibility. Alright, so when we want to lay out the UVs, we want to open the UV editor. There's lots of ways to get to it. If you have your poly modeling tab open, you can go over here and click on this green box with a checker in the middle. That'll open up your UV editor, and you'll have these floating menus of your UV toolkit and the UV editor itself. I hate floating menus, but that's how you'd activate them. Over here, you can click UV. There's another way to get to the UV editor. My preference is to go to the upper right-hand corner of Maya, where you have this Workspace drop-down menu, and go from Maya Classic all the way down to UV Editing. That way, when you open it up, it's all nicely docked to the right side of the screen. You can still go over here and see your 3D viewport, but you can also open up and see the UV editor, the 2D space, and then docked to the right of that is the UV toolkit. And it's just so much nicer than just trying to finagle floating windows. Anyway, that's just my preference. You can do whatever you want, just as long as you open up this editor. So next I'm going to go over here and click on the low poly meshes and see what I got. And what I got a hot mess. These default UVs are just not going to cut it. If I go over here and click on the little checker box at the top bar of my UV editor, you can actually see just how messy these are. They're stretched. Some of them aren't even showing up. Oh my goodness, look at that. Yeah, these are just not usable UVs. So we got to start over. I'm gonna just right click the UV editor screen, and I'm gonna go to UV shell. And then I'm gonna select these shells, and I'm just gonna click delete. Just gonna get rid of them. Now this mesh officially has no UVs. Now, what to do when your mesh doesn't have UVs is to project brand new ones. So what I'm gonna do is select both of these. So I'm just going to select them in object mode and grab them both and press F8 to make sure that they're in object mode. Blue usually indicates component mode, meaning edge mode, face mode, vertex mode. I want to just grab the objects as a whole. Now, there are so many options for projecting UV maps. You can go to create and choose your poison. A lot of people like to start with automatic mapping, which just throws down something to work with. Me personally, I like to start with camera-based because automatic, it sometimes works nicely, but more often than not, I end up with pieces all over the place because it's just projecting using like 6 different planar maps. So this is my workflow. I like to lay out my UV maps by using the camera-based method or normal-based, but I'm going to use camera-based. And what that does is it just creates UV shells on my 2 meshes. So each of these meshes are separate, so they're going to have 2 separate sets of UV shells. And what I'm going to do is, or what this does is, it creates 2 UV shells that are completely uncut. So these are not usable UVs, but they are a great starting point for just, getting things cut up and laid out. So what I'm going to do with these UV shells that I've created, I'm going to approach them like I would if I had a bunch of boxes that I needed to collapse for recycling. So what I mean by that is if I need to put something in recycling, I need to collapse it because those are the rules of the recycling company. And so if I were going to take a box and I were going to lay it flat, what would I need to do? I would need to maybe cut some of its edges. Maybe I would have to rip off pieces, whatever I would need to do to make that three-dimensional cardboard structure collapse. I'm going to approach this the same way. If I had a cardboard tube with, two caps on each end, I would need to take some scissors, cut off these caps, then I'd have to run my scissors down the side, and that's the only way I would get this to lay flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this cylinder and I'm going to press Control 1 to go into solo mode or isolate mode. I'm going to go over here and just right click, and I'm going to go to edge. And once I'm in edge mode, I'm going to double click along the edge of the cylinder, the top edge. Now I'm going to scroll down here, pan down here I guess, and I'm going to hold down shift and I'm going to double click along this edge as well. Now this cylinder had 20 faces to it, 20 divisions, so that means the top edge and the bottom edge will each have 20 edges, which means grand total I should have 40. If I look up here at the upper left hand corner, I've got my poly count menu and it says 40 edges. So I know I've got exactly the number of edges that I want. Perfect. I'm going to make sure I'm inside my UV editor and I'm going to press Shift X. And you'll notice immediately that the little area I had selected, previously it was just orange, now it feels like it's a brighter orange. If I click off of it, you can see it's now got this white halo. If you don't see that, it might mean that you have your texture borders turned off. So if you want to turn these on, it's the fourth button from the right. So if I turn that off, I can't see my texture borders, but if I turn it on, I can see exactly where I've cut. All right. Next, I've got to figure out where to cut my tube. So I'm going to press Control 1. And I kind of want this line to run back over. It's not really a tube. I don't care. I'm going to figure out where to cut my handle is what I mean. It just kind of looks like a tube. So I'm going to go ahead and click an edge along the back because we're trying to find the best, most non-discrete sort of or discrete way of cutting this handle. So if I'm going to be posing the handle this way or this way, the seam is going to be really obvious. This way it's a little less obvious if I have it back here. It doesn't matter when it comes to texturing because you can just use different tools to cover that. But when you're baking out maps, normals pick up on those seams. So I still like to try to mitigate seams. So now that I've selected an edge on the back of my handle, I'm going to go over here and press Shift X. And now you can see that the handle has another white highlight to indicate that I've made a cut. Now that I've got all my pieces cut, I'm going to right click UV shell, select all my UVs, and I'm going to press Control U to unfold. I also like to scroll down in my UV toolkit. Oops. Hold on. Scroll down in my UV toolkit, and I like to click on Orient Shells. And what Orient Shells does is it just kind of angles things a little bit better so that it's not, it's not so tilted. I mean, it didn't do a lot for the end caps, but it made this nice and straight. So now that I've got these laid out, I'm just going to set them aside for now, and I'm going to put my focus on the axe head itself. All right, so I'm going to think about this for a second. I think the best way to do this is to actually just lay it out like a box. It's practically a box anyway. I could just custom select these edges, but this is so similar to a box, I wonder if automatic mapping wouldn't give me a good outcome. I don't typically use it, but I'm going to give it a shot and see what happens. Actually, it looks really clean. That worked out well. So if you've got a structure that's really boxy, automatic mapping can be great. But if you have something that's more rounded, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of scattered pieces. This is also low poly enough that it's not hard to figure out where these pieces are and can sew them accordingly. So here's the front and back of my axe. Now I want to look at the top and the edges up here, and let's see what I've got. So this represents this piece over here. If I press 4, you can see that it's the top of my axe and a couple pieces of the edge. Don't really need the pieces of the edge being attached. So I'm going to go over here to my piece, click this, and press Shift X to cut it. and grab the separate UV shells that I've made. So now I've got this top piece. Perfect. I'm going to set it aside because that's basically how I want that piece to look. And let's see what else we got. Let's look at the bottom piece. That's this one here. And it looks like it's missing a few of its parts. So I can just go over here, click on Edge, shift right click, and use the Move and Sew option. And that's automatically going to take the piece that was over here and snap it over there. So I've got that being one unified piece. I want to basically try to mitigate my seams in such a way that they're kind of running along the edge of my axe. The reason that I want to do that is because these corners, like right here and the edge of the blade, those are places you'd expect to see edge wear. And so you can cover up any seams created by the normal maps by painting it in so that it seems like it's normal edge wear. So I'm trying to be really strategic. If I have just a random seam right here in the middle of my axe blade, like in a place where you wouldn't usually see edge wear, it's going to stick out. So that's why I'm being careful. Okay, so let's go over here, and it looks like we've got this being the blade of the axe. And we cut off this little piece earlier. So let's see, where's this edge up here? Is this, okay, that's up there. So down here, I'm going to click on this piece, shift right click, move and sew, and now the blade is all one piece. It's a little tilted for some reason, so let me just press Control U and re-unfold it. There we go, that's better, nice and flat. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over here, and of course whenever you move and sew, if you see any sort of distortions, like maybe there was some distortions on this piece, I don't really see them, but if there were, I could just press Control U and it can re-unfold it. I actually don't like the output as much. I'm just going to undo it because this is fine. I don't really see any distortions. If I want to be extra careful, I can go 3 buttons over on my UV editor, and I guess there are some distortions. So I'll go ahead and let it unfold. There we go. So this 3rd button over right here is your distortion map, and anything that is red or blue, it's going to identify as a place of distortion. And I might actually unfold this one again too, because I saw some red going on there. Now you're not always going to have it be perfect, and sometimes it straight up doesn't matter. Like there's some red right here in the middle of my axe shell, and that's because of this piece right here where it's bending. It's okay. It's not necessarily a bad thing unless it distorts your UVs in a significant way. The real test for finding out if your UVs are looking good is to go over here and click on your checkerboards. And if the distortion isn't anything terrible, then you can kind of disregard it. It actually is a little bit of a pain, so I might go over here and press Control U to relay that out. Let's take a look again. See, that fixed the boxes that were there. So that bit of distortion was bothersome. So you can sort of see it here, right here in the dip where it's a little bit longer. If I click on this and press Control U, see how it fixed it? So yeah, sometimes it's a good idea to pay attention to that distortion map. However, if you ever find yourself in a position where it becomes a real headache to lay out the UVs, then you could just, disregard the distortion as long as it's not bothering you. All right, and that distortion isn't too severe. All right, so let's see what we got here with these little pieces. What are we even looking at here? Press F. Okay, I got it. So if I click on this piece and I shift right click, move and sew, that puts us back into one piece. All right, cool. Let's do that again over here. If you press G, it didn't work. Usually when you push, you activate something like move and sew, you can tap G and it will repeat. And I'll bet you these little tips are these little end caps here. So I'm going to just grab this edge and I should be able to press G. It's just not working. Move and sew, no big deal. Try one more time. Oh, that time it worked. Okay, so we got one nice piece there. Click the UV shell, maybe lay it out one more time, unfold it. Double check. It's looking really good. All right, so these are pretty decent pieces. So the next step is going to be packing. Now that we kind of like where everything's at, we like the end result of our pieces, of our UV shells, including on the handles, we got to talk about packing them. So there's a couple of options. It really depends on what you're going to be doing with your maps. If for a simple object like this, I think everything should just be packed into one square. If you're going to keep them separate, like you're never going to combine them or you're never going to put them into a game engine, for instance, you could have a separate map entirely for the handle. But I'm going to go ahead and just pack these all into the same square. Since I want to keep these consistent because they are the same object, even though they're two separate pieces, there's two separate pieces that make up the axe, I want to go ahead and unify their texel density. So if we go over here to the UV toolkit and underneath the transform tab here, so unspooling this and scrolling down, you'll see that there at the very bottom, before you hit the create tab, you have texel density. So I think when it comes to texel density, sometimes you might be given a texel density. Other times you could take like the biggest piece. In this case, it's going to be this handle. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand it as far as I can, like if we're going to pack it. And then I'm going to say get. And so it's about 192 texels within a map size of 2048. Very important that you set this to whatever the texture map size you're, hold on, Maya, come back. Oh, sorry about that. It's very important that when it comes to texels, that you are making sure the map size matches the texture map size you're going to be using. So if you're going to use 4K textures, then you're going to want to put 4096 in. If you're going to be using 2K textures, then 2048. Make sure you match the map size because that's going to change the texel density units. So I think this is going to be fine, just to have this be set to like 192. So what I'll do is I will grab all my pieces and push the button set. And now they all match. They all have the same texel density. I may go down here and click on Orient Shells. Ooh, I don't like the output. I'm gonna press undo. And the last thing I want to do is pack all of these. So I could pack these manually, but I think what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to shift right click and go to my layout menu. So in the layout menu, I'm going to reset my settings. I'm going to go ahead and use the unfold 3D option instead of legacy. I don't care if it fixes my non-manifold geometry because I've already taken care of my non-manifold geometry before I got to this point. Packing resolution, go ahead and change that to 2048. Non-overlapping. Rotation, I'm going to keep rotation off. I'm going to say I don't want anything scaled because I already set my texel density and I don't want this scaling anything. It can translate my shells, but I don't want it rotating my shells. So I'm going to say no to rotating. Texture map size, 2048. Shell padding, I'm going to go ahead and put in a shell padding of about 10. And what shell padding does is it just makes sure that there's like at least 10 pixels between each shell and 10 pixels between each shell and the tile boundary. So there's nothing slipping over the UV edge. Distribute, cool, full square, first square, no scale. And layout. Okay, helps if I select some shells first. Let's try that again. Layout. And there we go. Still a little bit closer together than it needs to be. And it just feels like there's so much wasted texture space. I wonder if we couldn't increase our texel density. Let's try it. I'm going to go rotate this. By the way, if you are rotating your shell and you don't get this nice snap, just go under Tools and activate Step Snap by increments of 15. All right, so what if I were to take this shell and just scale it up? Yeah, okay, what's this texel density? 239? Okay, let's try that. Set. Okay, everything's a little bit bigger now. I'm going to go ahead and just pack this shell. So layout. And I'm going to go ahead and pack this a little more manually. I pressed F just to make sure that there's enough space up there. I actually don't know if this is the proper cap for this end. Let's see. Whoops, that's the cap that goes at that end. Let me switch these around real quick. All right, and now let's bring in these other pieces. I think I'm going to go ahead and rotate them. It seems like a waste not to use the space to make bigger maps and have a higher resolution texture. So that's what I'm gonna do. All right, and that's packed really nicely. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to go from my UV editing workspace to my classic. And I'm going to go ahead and delete my history. All my transformations are frozen. Just kind of double checking everything. It's looking good. Everything in my low poly group is named the same as my high poly group. Let's go ahead and add a material or two. So I could use one material and just sort of mask off the axe away from the handle. What's nice about the way we laid out the UVs is it's really easy to do that as opposed to using multiple materials. You know, I think I'm going to do that. Let's go ahead and just apply one standard material to this whole thing. And then we'll use masking instead of multiple materials to kind of isolate the different pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of these and I'm going to shift right click and, or I'm sorry, force the habit. I'm going to right click and I'm going to assign favorite material and we're going to go with a standard surface. And I'm just going to call this my axe material, MTL, so just a little shorthand. All right, so now my low poly axe is ready to go, my high poly axe is ready to go. Let's go and export them. So I'm going to grab my axe low and I'm going to go File and I'm going to Export Selection. And I had already done a test run of this export earlier, so I already have it saved. But let's do it again. Yes. And over here, we've got the axe high, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. Go into visibility, turn that off. And I'm going to go over here to my axe high, and I'm going to turn that on. And grabbing the axe high group, I'm going to go File, Export Selection, and use that as my axe high. Yes. All right, in our next tutorial, we'll go ahead and pop these open in Substance.